Welcome to Electric Perspectives, a podcast that explores how America's electric companies are working to deliver the reliable, affordable, secure, and clean energy that powers our economy and our everyday lives. This show is brought to you by EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, which represents all U.S. investor-owned electric companies. I'm your host, Brian Reel.
In response to increasingly frequent and extreme storms and wildfires and the need to meet customer expectations, electric companies are adopting advanced data analysis tools to improve weather predictions, which support emergency preparations and responses. On this episode, we have three experts who will share their experience with storm response analytics and the valuable lessons learned while developing and deploying data-driven forecasting and restoration models. I would like to welcome Pacific Gas and Electric Vice President of Emergency Preparedness and Response, Angie Gibson, Southern Company Enterprise Data Analytics Director Shane Powell, and eSource Data Science Director Kyle Decker. Thanks all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks.
And maybe we'll just start out with a quick minute or so of just your role and the kind of things that you're working on regularly. And maybe we start with you, Angie.
Awesome. Yeah. So my role as the Vice President of Emergency Preparedness and Response is to review the risks and threats and have my team develop plans, train and exercise those plans. We have a hazard awareness warning center that's 24/7, 365 that helps keep situational awareness for all of our functional areas. We have a great geoscience team that helps us with our seismic risk and debris flow modeling and a lot of our hydro assessments, and a great full-time EOC now. So it's a full-time job. It's a huge territory, 70,000 square miles, and we're very privileged to serve 16 million Californians.
Great. Thanks. And Shane, how about a little bit about what you work on at Southern Company?
Yeah, so been with Southern Company about 26 years now. Most of that time was in just traditional transmission and distribution operation. Recently was able to take a new role where I oversee the data analytics for Alabama Power. And then even more recently, as of like a month ago, started a new role as Director of Power Delivery Data Analytics for Southern Company. So in that job, just really responsible for innovating around data analytics to improve operational efficiency, hopefully lower cost, improve customer satisfaction, and just find new ways to gain insights from our data that drives Alabama Power, Southern Company into a better position of operating our system and grid. Just as the world continues to demand and expect more of the electric grid, to try and be there and be ready to offer ways to fix that and meet that growing demand.
Great. And then Kyle, how about a little bit about eSource and the way in which you're working with electric companies?
Yeah, for sure. So I lead up our work developing and providing solutions for severe weather impacts to the electric grid. I've been working on analytical applications within the utility sector and within eSource for around the past decade or so. I've had the fortunate experience to work with utilities like Southern Company and PG&E on the development of the analytics. Most of our analytics focused on forecasting electric power outages as well as predicting and optimizing restoration times. We develop product and deploy those in a collaborative kind of framework with our utility clients, and more broadly speaking within eSource, we develop product and have consulting services for electric utilities.
Great. And to jump in, I guess, Angie, why should electric companies invest in predictive analytics for storm response? And really, when did you and your team start using it at PG&E, and what drove your decision to start using the tools and seeing how they could help?
Our climate has changed dramatically. And with the advent of the internet, technology has just expanded at such a rapid pace. Data is now a huge component of all of our lives. And what we found is there's so much value in the data that's available that's beyond the ability for a person to analyze by themselves. And so leveraging predictive analytics, artificial intelligence to help synthesize those big data sets is critical to the speed at which we need to make decisions. Our communities rely on us as utilities to deliver gas and electricity. That gas and electricity has become basic safety need. You know, we used to be able to respond to storms and it would be okay if the power was out for 5 or 6 days. Now that's becomes critical to our communities, and we have to be able to respond much quicker. So leveraging predictive analytics to synthesize these big data sets to maximize the speed at which we can make decisions is really our reason for stepping into this space.
And knowing that across the EI's membership here, there's always the focus on keeping costs as low as possible for customers. Is this something that actually helps with those efforts?
Absolutely. The faster you can make decisions and leveraging that data, that will improve the quality of the decision. So, for example, our service area is 70,000 square miles. It's very easy for us to make a decision to move resources from one end of the area to the other. Using predictive analytics, that adds a quality component to the decision we're making, and we can understand through those analytics whether or not we're going to be achieving the result we expect, which ends up making the response more efficient and supporting greater customer affordability.
And Shane, what spurred your team to begin using analytics in storm preparation and response processes?
I mean, it's hard to really top Angie's answer because she said it all. Like, if you think of how are you going to respond to a large event, and just be honest. So I'm Southern Company, so that's Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia. We got hit with 3 hurricanes alone last year. So we get a lot of events, right? They're big, large events that go across our entire service territory, and now you've got to get lights on to 3+ million customers, 4 million customers. You need to do that effectively and efficiently. And the thing I love about the utility industry is we're obviously very collaborative. We support each other. So mutual assistance, right? We all kind of reach out and say we need additional resources to respond to this event. Well, you're all putting pressure on the exact same resource pool. So, while we're requesting, so is the Carolinas, so is Florida, so is Tennessee. And so if we can really have good measurement, good insight into predictive, what do we think we're going to experience and where, to Angie's point, how large the territory is, you can kind of pre-stage crews, resources, and then the cost piece that you ask about, you're not over committing or under committing. So if we under commit resources, restoration is longer. Again, to Angie's point, it's critical to our customers, critical to normalcy of life, to supply chain, to industrial and commercial customers. So if we underdo it, we prolong the outages. If we overdo it, we put a disproportionate amount of cost back on the consumers, right? And so our job is to use every means we can in order to most effectively hit the number as close to the head as we can. It's weather, it's unpredictable, it's hard to do, but leveraging data, the large data sets, and leveraging partners and being collaborative across the industry, like getting better and better at this, that led us to this process. Honestly, I guess the question you asked was, where did we start? We started in this storm response. And then our second use case was in, like, if you're thinking of how we're passing cost to the customer, how do we get a little sharper with that? How do we do a better job of that? So for us, it was how do we lower cost, increase our service, and do what we're doing just a little bit better?
And the idea of big data always sounds a bit abstract, but Kyle, being from the big data side here, can you talk a little bit about what goes into developing models, what sort of data is being used, and how do these processes work?
Yeah, for sure. Key to all model development when we're working with our clients here is that the models are developed specific to their local service territory. And we want that to really be a collaborative effort. We don't use canned off-the-shelf models that are just trained over broader footprints. So that's something that's really key to us, is taking into account the local conditions and the local data sources in each territory. That said, we like to take a pretty mechanistic approach when we do this. So we'll try to get after mechanisms that are either contributing to the occurrence of outage events or potentially the restoration of outage events in space and time, depending what we're trying to do. As Shane and Angie were keying in on, we may be trying to forecast outages. We may be trying to say, given outages that are on your system, how long is it going to take to achieve restoration? Obviously, critical when we're in the forecast space is weather conditions. That could be weather at the time of interest. Are there high wind gusts forecasted, high sustained winds, a good amount of precipitation that's occurring? And then beyond that, what's happened up to that point? Have we had a lot of precipitation that's occurred within the last 2 weeks? Maybe a nice proxy for soil moisture being high, more chance for vegetation to uproot and things of that effect. And that really brings it into more the secondary nature of, it's not just weather alone, but it's weather in combination with other effects, namely vegetation. So when we talked about the trees potentially uprooting, so eSource actually has some remote sensing analytics in-house where we map out vegetation around the distribution conductor. We then use that in combination with the weather data to get that kind of full picture of risk to the utility system when a potential storm event is on the horizon. So it's a little bit about the data inputs there.
And maybe a quick follow-up there for you,
Mhm.
Kyle, and others feel free to chime in. Is it informing the strategy to prepare for events, or is it also utilized during and after you have extreme weather incidents?
Yeah, great question. All of them. All of them, I would say, honestly. I mean, we think about it like before the event, that's really where forecasting comes into play, and we're trying to understand what's the potential impact on the system given a certain expectation of outages. What does it mean? If we had baseline staffing levels, what would it take to achieve restoration? Well, maybe it's going to take a week. And so then back to the point that Shane and Angie were hitting on earlier, maybe we need to start thinking about mutual aid. We need to think about making some staffing decisions. That's where the analytics on the restoration side start to come into play to say, hey, if we're going to make some staffing changes, what should those be? What would be the most optimal? And what would it take if we want to achieve restoration in 72 hours, 48 hours, or 24 hours? Really, the analytics kind of help make all of those decisions in a pre-event fashion. And then as the event goes on, we start to take into account actualized damage on the system. And then those restoration estimates just get better and better and better and start to act as more of a planning and monitoring tool throughout the course of the storm.
I'm going to tack on there. When I think of like the specific tool that we've co-developed with eSource, it's what's the expecting impact of this event? What is the expected cost of this event? What is the expected duration of this event? And then you get into the event unfolding and you try and look at what's actually happened and then adjust, right? It's like a basketball game or a football game. You kind of go into the game with a game plan, you see what the other team's doing, and then you adjust. And that's so much better than just waiting until halftime and then saying, hey, we're going to come up with a plan based on what we're seeing. And then kind of the final is you do analytics on report out, like what did we predict, what actually happened, and then how do we adjust the engine? And I think like Kyle specifically does such a good job of this of let's go back and kind of tweak the variables so that next time we get a similar thing, it's tighter to what actually unfolds. But to me, it's understanding all facets of how do we manage the cost, the duration, and the kind of the expected impact just to our own employees and our customers.
And maybe a follow-up for Angie. I know you serve in the National Response Executive Committee, which helps to coordinate large-scale mutual assistance responses across the country, especially when there are multiple events going on at once impacting multiple states, just to make sure that industry is responding effectively and close coordinated across industry, across government, all that. With what you all are learning at the company level, does that also help inform the strategy and the planning and the coordination that's happening cross industry?
Oh, absolutely. And so as Shane mentioned with the mutual assistance in particular, when a utility asks for support, the other utilities that are contemplating whether or not they can support that request are evaluating their work plans for base work, and they're evaluating what work they can pause or push to the next year depending on the duration of the request. And so this year, PG&E sent over 300 coworkers to support Hurricane Milton and Hurricane Helene in both Georgia Power and in Florida Power and Light service areas. And we had to take that step. We had to look at our work. And so using these models to help really nail down that forecast allows the supporting utility to really right size the offering to that requesting utility, which prevents a greater impact on their regulatory compliance work, the new business work they're doing, the work that they're willing to pause to then provide industry level support. It's really critical. And I would also like to say that when you're looking at big data, there's a lot of models being developed, and those models themselves can be integrated with each other, which then you're getting this force multiplier. And I'll give you an example of that. And so at PG&E, we use a lot of different models to perform predictive analytics. We've adopted them with 1,400 of our 1,600 weather stations. We use them in the development of our fire potential index. We use them on our outage probability weather model, which is really critical to what we're talking about right now, is the ability for us to predict the probability of outages hourly. Then allows us to, as Shane said, really pre-stage resources and then be nimble, because as the model runs in the meteorology community change, they do a new model run, I think, every 4 hours. As those change, we can make those nimble adjustments to staffing. We can see if one model said we're going to be hit hard in one area, and then the future models say no, the intensity is shifting. So now we can very quickly make that same shift without having to wait for whether or not the outages happen.
And this, I guess, for you, Shane, have you seen data science and predictive analytics drive real change to your processes? And were there any surprises, kind of good, bad, and indifferent as you were working through it all?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think I always talk about current state, and then future state. And so when we first built the model, no, it didn't have a huge impact on our business because people had to learn to kind of trust the data, trust where we were at. Over the last, I would say, like calendar year, I've seen a huge increase in adoption and what people are willing to do. So probably every month that goes by, we get a little more aggressive in how much we trust the data. And so the impact it's made to our business is literally moving resources in advance of a storm to where we expect the hardest hit areas to be, pre-staging, moving equipment, moving people, moving material, and then kind of right off the bat knowing the duration of the event, which also changes. Like, do you set up a staging area? Do you go ahead and reach out for meal prep and hotels accommodations? So it has a profound impact on our business, and I'm seeing it do more and more for us. But again, it's just how will every utility adjust to the model driven approach instead of the gut driven approach? I think I can't have a conversation without pointing this out. Most utilities are 100 plus years old. I mean, we're 120, and you have to have been good at doing what you're doing to survive that long. So I think just by and large, all utilities are really good at handling storm, building assets, rebuilding assets, and keeping lights on. It's a matter of, can you, get 1% savings, 10% savings off being more efficient, and literally leveraging data and models to drive better results. Because the end is, we are all a public service, entity, where our goal is to provide a service to a customer that's critical to life. So if we get sharper, it allows us to be better for our customers, raise their expectation and their satisfaction with the product, and deliver it at lower cost, is I think what all of our goal is.
And Kyle, it might be helpful to speak to what type of information you're gathering to the extent that you're allowed to, and what are the actual kind of inputs that go into modeling restoration, and how much of it do you need to be comfortable with the results that you're putting out? Is there a too little, too much kind of Goldilocks that you're all attacking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key always is to start simple. The more data we have and the better quality data we have, the better the results will be. So that's definitely key to keep in mind. But for restoration in particular, step number one, knowing what resources are there. We can assume maybe it's baseline to get an initial estimate, but being able to understand, are you going to bring in additional resources? What are the ETA of those resources? Where are they located? That's going to then influence how we're going to ultimately predict the restoration rates and then the ultimate time that restoration is achieved. Another critical one is damage on the system. That could be through the form of what's already been actualized when we're during the heat of the storm or after the storm impact. It could also be what's forecasted. And this is where, back to the point Angie brought up with the force multiplier approach. Well, if we have forecast and restoration both in tandem with each other, we get this really nice view that allows us to account for the entire storm system instead of only seeing the partial picture. So that damage on the system could be actualized, or it could also be what's ultimately forecasted to come. And then just other pieces that are relevant to restoration in particular, things that are going to influence crews to be able to complete work. That could be the difficulty of an outage. So, for instance, is it downed wires versus a blown fuse? That could also be the accessibility of the outage location. Is it in an area that's remote and hard to get to and pretty far from an access point? All these things can kind of come into account and then ultimately influence the rate at which we're predicting those restoration efforts to be complete.
And I assume that pursuing a data-driven approach requires buy-in from leadership. So maybe, Angie, you could talk a little bit about how you've been working with company leadership to make sure that they accept and trust the information that the models are providing. Or do you never trust it, but you're careful along the way?
Exactly, right? That's a really great question, though. I think what we have found is one of our performance playbooks is lean. And so lean has its 5 plays, and one of those plays, 2 of those plays, are problem solving and waste elimination, right? And waste elimination goes right back to affordability. When we look at what is the biggest cost driver of our response, it's people. Shane gave a lot of really great examples about other things that they consider like base camps and lodging and things like that. If you look at what the drill down driver is for all of those things, it's people, it's your resources. They're the majority of your cost. And so if you can focus a model incorporating the impact from the storm and then the resources you're going to need to respond to that storm, earthquake, tsunami, volcanic eruption, whatever it is, you're going to be setting up to be able to be efficient, targeted, and it's all going to end up resulting in a more affordable response for our customers that also is quicker, safer, because you're being able to account for all these really critical data points that as people we synthesize in this mutually exclusive pattern where the artificial intelligence and predictive analytics can do it together simultaneously and then can see the connection points. And when you're talking to leadership about an investment like this, it's not just the leadership you're talking to. You have to get buy-in from the field organizations because they're the ones responding to the storm from their gut. They're the ones who are going to challenge the model outputs and say, well, now, wait a minute. The last time I needed 15 crews for this type of event, and now you're saying I only need 10. And so you really have to bring them in and do this collaboratively. And so if you could do it in 2 paths, bringing in the field leadership so that they have influence, they feel like they're being heard, that they're part of the development of the model, and then demonstrate through that to your leadership that the ultimate result of this is going to be greater efficiency and customer affordability. You're going to be able to then roll this model out more successfully. It'll be developed better. You're going to be incorporating the knowledge of those folks that have been in those geographic areas for so long. And then you're going to be able to answer the questions of your leadership when they ask you, what are we going to get out of this?
Is the amount of time you and your team spend responding to events measurable? Like, what's the breakdown between how much time and you're preparing for events versus out in the field working on those responses?
Well, for me as an emergency manager and a disaster scientist, this is how I equate it to my organization. 95% of what my team does is preparing. 5% of what my team does is responding. But response is the shiny thing, right? Response gets all the attention. And so sometimes that's why it's difficult for folks to get leadership to engage in investing in preparedness because it's the unseen. It's the unseen, though, that makes that 5% run like a machine. And so it's important for us as leaders in this space to be able to make that connection for our leadership.
And Shane, Angie touched on some examples of how this supports and impacts crews who are working in the field. Are there other ways from your experience that it just helps the workers with their work and their planning?
Yeah, great question. So part of my career path was actually supervising and managing line crews and engineers. And I think when I first had my first round of overseeing line crews, I really saw, we've got this incredible employee base and they love responding. They love what they do. They want to serve our communities. And when they want to work, they want to work. And then occasionally, they need a break, right? Like we all have kids, we all have spouses that we want to get home to. And so helping them have the ability to work when they can and want to, and then step away for a moment for a weekend every now and then so that they can live their life, it got ingrained in me. And so I always wanted to see tools developed that allowed us to share insights so that they could plan better. And so, like, I know we all have apps on our phone now that show 5 days of weather. One, you didn't have that a couple years ago, but two, that is one thing. But if I can show you exactly how many outages are going to be on your system in the next 5 days, that's another. And so, really, what I love about where we're at with our current tools is to be able to communicate very clearly at every level of our company, hey, I expect this kind of impact to our system over the next 5 business days. And I think it allows us to plan our lives, right? To be a first responder, to be an emergency responder that provides this critical asset to our customers, while also being a person that lives life and has kids and gets to go to soccer games and birthday parties. Because I've seen over my career us lose the ability to do that. Like you don't really know it's coming. You get called, you have to respond. And so kind of changing that from I don't really know what to expect to no, I have a real good idea of what to expect. I think that empowers our employees to just really be more passionate, be more engaged in the community and more engaged in their work and more engaged in their home life.
And a quick follow-up, Shane, is the work that you're doing benefiting all of the Southern Company subsidiaries?
Yeah, so I had this really forward-thinking senior vice president, Scott Moore, and 7, 8 years ago, he said, "Hey, we should start getting into data," right? So, in my opinion, that was like cutting edge, 8 years ago, and so we got a really good head start on it. But what we've seen is because of that head start, we were building some things that you can see would add value to Georgia and Mississippi. And so recently we took steps to kind of expand my role into a Southern Company director role. So we are now taking these same tools that we built and we're building them for Georgia and Mississippi. And we hope to not only get to spread what we've been doing to them, but see what they've been doing, what kind of models they have built out, where they're at in their cutting edge tools, and combine the best of the best. So really, I hope the next year at Southern Company is hey, we see this really great thing at Alabama. We see this really great thing at Georgia. Let's spread both of those across the system and just kind of add benefit across the entire Southern Company footprint to what we're doing.
And to think about how a company might get started with these sort of technologies, what initial challenges might a company expect to face? And is there a process where companies try it on the side while working through their normal operations and procedures, and you're gradually incorporating it more and more into the processes and working to validate results as you go, or you just got to go for it and jump right in? What was your experience, Angie?
Yeah, this is something that is often done, the parallel execution, particularly with modeling. And that's the approach that we're taking with the model we're working with eSource to develop. We call it the restoration work plan. And so right now we're in phase one, and we've incorporated the outages from our storm outage prediction project, which is the pre-event staging. To Shane's point, it gives us the 4-day view of outages per division. It's that AI component that I mentioned earlier. And we've incorporated that with the model that eSource is building for resources. We're running it parallel with our manual resource process, which is also helping build credibility in the model. It's also helping us identify the tiny little gaps that can be game changing when trying to get our field coworkers to accept the model results. And so having that parallel, that kind of contingent path forward is really important as you're developing the model. The phase two component that we're moving into now, we're actually going to be taking it past outages, and we're going to be incorporating work packages. And so when you look at models, it's, generally, and I think Kyle and Shane will agree, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? The greater level of detail you can get with the data, you're going to be able to refine it at a greater level. And so with storm response, the outages are great, but not all outages are the same, right? You can have an outage impacting a transformer, and you can have an outage that has 15 poles on the ground and 16 spans of wire. The first outage is one crew. The second outage is, 5 to 7 crews, depending. So that impacts your resource plan. And so getting down to that work package level, we're going to be able to greatly refine the results of the model and really develop a very strong opportunity to implement a resource plan that captures all of the subtleties of response, because it's going down to that kind of last layer of what is the work.
And Kyle, on the technology side, are there barriers to entry from like a technology perspective or common hurdles that you see clients having to overcome to get started?
Maybe less so from a technology perspective. I really liked what Angie said on the parallel path and parallel implementation, because I honestly think that's one of the biggest challenges, is just how to define ultimately how the predictive analytics will help augment your current operational processes, and how are you going to define success. I think certain clients have this kind of false expectation that there may be an ability to predict weather a week in advance, and you have that really strong kind of perfect scenario of being able to understand exactly how many outages you hit it every single time. That is just not the world we live in. So to Angie's point, I think it's very important to be comparing to, well, what's our alternative? What information and what decisions would we make if we didn't have this at our fingertips? And I think the utilities that have that mindset going in and have this kind of like plan of attack in terms of implementation are going to be the ones that for sure benefit the most from this and have the highest likelihood of success.
And with the models you have in place, does eSource continue to engage to improve accuracy and dependability, to kind of learn as you go?
You got it. You got it. That's 100% correct. I mean, and one of the things we also really like is a layer of transparency. So I think Shane hit on this earlier, is just what happened in the last storm. We're also not trying to hide how we predicted. So we have several views created within the tool that allow you to go back and see exactly what was forecasted, what were the inputs that were forecasting this level of damage, and then we can then do an after action review and see, all right, are there other inputs that potentially would have helped predict a similar storm, assuming we missed it? Or are we systematically seeing some type of drift in the performance that's happening that we need to correct? So it's always kind of meant and designed to be this feedback loop. And another thing that Angie hit on earlier is although we want the data to drive it, it's not data alone. That's why we kind of call this data science. It's, one part data, maybe two parts science. And the science piece really comes in with the boots on the ground, the folks that know the system inside and out and are going to help us include data sources that will ultimately be the most influential in our modeling approach. So I really like that approach that we've taken. And again, it's not just data alone, it's meant to be collaborative throughout the whole process.
And as we wrap up here, are there any words of wisdom of a company that's just starting out? What sort of approach will let them set a really strong foundation to be successful? And maybe we'll start with you, Shane.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to hit on is just a couple things that Kyle and Angie just pointed out, right? So if I were just starting, the feedback loop is so critical, right? So Angie mentioned getting key stakeholders in the room to kind of talk about what they want so that they go into the project trusting it. And then two, when you build an analytics tool and it says, here's what's going to happen, having a feedback loop that judges its own performance, that then you can go back and share with your key stakeholders, right? So as I meet with you on the front end, I hear what you want and we start building it. Now it performs and I come back to you and say, hey, here's what I told you was going to happen in this last storm. Here's what actually happened. And here's the action I'm taking to make that better. Just this collaborative loop is really where I would start if I were just starting out. Like that builds trust that you need. Trust builds success. Success builds like a bigger appetite to do more through data, versus if you are not transparent or you can't get off the ground or you don't collaborate on the front end. I mean, it just brings a lot of skepticism in, because I've touched on it again, but we're a very old company and people have done a very good job of building knowledge and trusting their gut. So when you bring in new technology, it's just not always trusted right off the bat. So kind of establishing the base load of what are we doing and why are we doing it really leads to long-term success, which then leads to advancing your own initiatives, like people trusting, building data literacy, building a community, building a whole group of people that want to take data further to make operations more successful.
And it sounds like setting expectations is a piece of that as well. How about you, Angie?
Oh, wow. So my metaphor to this process is like painting a house. You have to put the hard work in the prep. And so in this particular situation, prepping for a model, you have to do the hard work of doing problem solving. What are you trying to solution? You have to maintain a scope because people are going to start getting excited. And then they're going to start going, well, what if it could do this? And what if it could do that? And before you know it, this project that you needed to turn around in 9 months is now, 2 years out. And so you have to be willing to kind of corral folks saying, hey, discipline wise, this is the scope for this phase. We're going to have other phases. As you bring up ideas, we're going to put them in this parking lot, and then we'll identify which phase they need to go into. And then lastly, you've got to do value stream mapping. You've got to map out the current state process, and you've got to then map out the to-be state process. And with the value stream mapping, maybe you're doing a time and motion study to understand, here's how long it takes us to do this process now, and here's the result and the level of accuracy and the quality. And then here's what we're shooting for with the new. What do we need it to be? And then the last point I'll make is that you have to be willing to let go of any perception you have of obstacles. Have to step into this saying what needs to be true to get what I need. And then going from what needs to be true to, okay, for example, I need X budget dollars to do this. I need this person on board to do this. I need this data set to do this. And then tackle those independently. And it's amazing what you can accomplish when you take that kind of approach, because you're freeing people up to think innovatively. And we're great at innovating in the middle of an event, right? We all can admit, right? There's no silos, there's no borders. We're all in it together. We're serving our customers. It's when we're in the day-to-day trying to do things like this type of project to drive us to making things easier and more effective in a storm, where sometimes we run into those relationship level obstacles. And so it's really important that you compartmentalize these things and then tackle them one at a time, and don't let them be the mountain, because you've stacked them all together, that creates challenges with moving forward.
Great. And Kyle, I imagine you and your team have spent some time gathering examples, building demos, those sort of things. What's a good way to see some of this in action?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, folks can first of all visit our website for high-level information, and then reach out to any of our sales team members or myself, and we're happy to schedule a demo, walk through that with you collaboratively, and see how it can help provide the same insights as it's providing at PG&E and Southern Company.
Well, thank you all for being here with us. And we know that customers and communities really depend on you all to be at your best when a crisis like a storm or wildfire hits. So for all the work that you do in that 95% leading up to an incident like that, we just really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. This was very informative.
And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening, and come back next week to hear more from experts and industry leaders who are talking about the innovative ways electric companies are building a cleaner, smarter, stronger energy future for the customers and communities they serve. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Podbeam, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Electric Perspectives. I'm your host, Brian Reel. Thanks for listening.